This, of course, is the biennial budget that we're writing this session. As you know, it's a 105-day session, so it will be longer, and we will be in person for the first time in 2 years. So I'm looking forward to that. It does make the budget writing process much easier. So I'm glad that we'll have that face-to-face interaction and be able to really dig in as we write this biennial budget. This biennial budget, as it relates to the capital budget, which I am the ranking member of, will be smaller than the last one. We, of course, in the last biennium, we passed a historic budget, $6 billion on the capital side, which has never been done before in the history of Washington State. And primarily that was from all of the federal ARPA funds that came our way that we were able to appropriate through the state allocations to various projects, infrastructure projects around Washington. This year, the budget will be back to a more of a normal forecast. So we'll be about $4.3 billion in capital funding that we'll be able to write a budget for.
Do you have particular hopes or priorities, Mike, for how this capital budget might best serve the 12th district?
Well, the interesting thing, of course, Jefferson, is that the 12th district is brand new, as is every district in Washington State, since the Redistricting Commission redistricted all of us. Of course, I will continue to represent all of Chelan County, about 13,000 people in Douglas County, and then I will have a portion of Snohomish County, all of the city of Monroe, which is really where my Snohomish County portion lies, and all of Highway 2, and then a small portion of King County. So it'll be very interesting. And I as the ranking member of the capital budget, of which there's only one in Washington State, I'm feeling unique pressures from counties that I have not seen before or represented before. So we're working on building those relationships and understanding their capital needs. But of course, my heart is here in Chelan County, North Central Washington, born and raised in Chelan. And so my hope is to be able to deliver capital projects across the district, but certainly projects that are close to home in Wenatchee and Leavenworth, Lake Chelan, and of course, East Wenatchee. So we'll be working on those things as session progresses.
One of the things that the Legislative Assembly for the 12th District has been proposed and has been pushing on is the idea of a regional aquatic center. Do you foresee in the capital process this year any leeway to get some funding across for that?
Well, I think there's a lot of conversations left to be had around the regional aquatic center and that approach. Of course, we of course in Chelan and Douglas counties have the original PFD that we're continuing to pay off. And so I'm a little hesitant to jump into the deep end of the pool, as it were, to create yet another credit card for our district to create this regional aquatic center. So we'll have that conversation, and I've been having that conversation with the senator, and we'll see how it goes. But as I say, I'm a little hesitant to create yet another option for taxation on our local folks.
In the new 12th district, do you see competing interests? Places where Chelan might have to lose in order for Monroe to gain, that kind of thing. Are you having to balance more concerns across a broader region?
That's a great question. I did indeed spend a lot of time on the other side of the Cascade Mountain Range, which is now where the new part of the district is, getting to know folks and understanding the issues. And I would say that I still represent pretty rural communities, even on the west side of the Cascade Mountain Range. And those interests are continuing to be very similar to the ones that are represented on the east side of the Cascade Mountain Range. But I would just say that, again, as the ranking member of the capital budget, you always have to have an eye to the whole of the state. And you don't always get to worry about solely your district. So I wouldn't say there's a competing interest. I think there's an opportunity for us to really look and see what the needs are and make sure that we're equitably dispersing and helping with those needs across Washington. And I've always been very clear in my role on the capital budget that I expect there is geographic diversity in the way in which we hand out these capital dollars. So I don't expect that approach to change, but I am spending a lot of time getting familiar with folks and issues on the west side of the Cascade Mountain Range. And I do think that we will develop a district that is complementary across the whole of the 12th. And working with my seatmates, I'm sure we'll accomplish what we need to make sure everybody gets what they need.
It seems like one of the similarities that we would have in our area with our 12th district neighbors on the west side of the Cascades is there are a lot of Highway 2 communities. Kashmir, Leavenworth, they're Highway 2 towns in the same way. Skykomish, Monroe, Sultan are.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. We've always had a little portion of Highway 2 that we've had to represent, and now we have the whole of the highway, which I think will make it easier actually to have these larger holistic conversations around safety corridors and expansions. And of course, we now join other delegations across Highway 2, where districts meet up, legislative districts meet up and share some of those concerns. So we may have more of a voice in with respect to the transportation issues across Highway 2.
Mike, one of the things that Governor Inslee has proposed as a capital budget initiative is some financing for housing units. He wants to build about 2,200 units throughout the state, paid for through the capital budget. There are other referendum ideas to pay for more. But as far as the capital budget aspect of that goes, do you see that as something that could serve areas like Chelan, Leavenworth, where workforce housing, for instance, is just so hard to come by?
Well, I would say that it has to. Otherwise, that budget will not pass. This is the only budget, of course, in the state that requires a bipartisan approach to writing it, because Republicans are necessary still to pass the bonds that pay for it. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, my approach to the capital budget has always been geographic diversity, equitable diversity of those funds across Washington, because we of course still deal with housing issues in Chelan County. We deal with housing issues across every county in Washington. And we need to make sure that if we're going to spend that kind of money and we're going to get creative in this manner that the governor proposes, that money benefits every citizen in every county in Washington state. And so I think there's a lot of conversation left to be had in his proposal, because this was brand new, but no, he didn't do any of the legwork to bring any of the budget writers up to speed on this proposal. So we're seeing it just as the public saw it. And so now we have to go in and understand his proposal and his funding mechanism and see if it's something we're comfortable with passing.
There was a slight gain, a 1 seat gain, I think, for Democrats in the House. Does that change the balance? Or does that change the way that Republicans have to work and negotiate to get their capital budget proposals through?
To some extent, so it's a 60% required vote to pass the bonds required to pay for the capital budget. And so we did lose, as you mentioned, one person in that. So it does tilt the balance slightly, rather than having 2 Republicans necessary to pass the budget, it requires only 1 to vote with the Democrats to pass the budget. And so that margin is much narrower. But I think, I prided myself over all the years of really working in a bipartisan fashion and creating a bipartisan approach, regardless of the votes necessary to pass the bonds. We need to work together because this budget is a job creator, economic driver, and really the community builder for Washington state. And I think both sides of the aisle see that.
Well, I was mentioned earlier bills that have been pre-filed by legislators, and one by Senator Warnick of the 13th District she's pre-filed a bill that would exempt the first 20,000 gallons of wine sold by a winery from the stamp tax, from the 0.87% stamp tax, I believe. As a representative of Washington wine country, where do you fall on this issue?
Well, I support that legislation. I think it's really trying to get at the heart of what we have so many of here in the 12th Legislative District, which are small boutique wineries who are not doing large case productions, but are still in production and farming. And it's awfully hard to swallow some of those initial taxes when you're so small and you're just trying to get your first cases out the door. So I think it's a good idea, and I look forward to working with her to get it through the House.
Mike, do you retain your committee seats on appropriations and education, or are those new seats for you?
I will retain all of my seats as they were in committee. So yes, continue to work in education, and I will continue to serve on the Appropriations Committee.
If you had to pick only one of those areas, which would be the seat you would choose to retain?
That's a great question, but it's a hard one to answer because they're so vastly different. I think I'm very fortunate to serve on 2 budget committees, ranking on one and serving on the other. That's a lot of work. Most legislators do not serve on 2 budget committees just because of the requirement of time and effort to get all of those bills and everything understood and read. But education is really, outside of the budgets now, my only policy area that I work in terms of a policy committee. And so I really enjoy that work, and I appreciate, representing as many school districts as I do. In rural Washington, I think it's important that rural Washington school districts have a voice on that committee, and I'm excited to continue to serve in that way.
Can you think of anything else about the upcoming session, whether it be capital budget or some other aspect that your constituents might need to know about or be interested in?
Well, I think one of the most important things to note is that we really are asking that constituents get engaged. And we've made it easier than ever. I think now, coming out of this pandemic, understanding that virtual meetings do work, there's an opportunity for constituents to continue to meet with us virtually. So if you can't make that trek to Olympia, but you still want to meet with us, I'm happy to do that virtually. I'm happy to bring you into committee meetings virtually if you want to testify on bills. The only thing of note there is that it's up to the chair's discretion as to whether or not they will allow for virtual testimony. And so, I'm excited that I'll be able to, narrow that gap a little bit for folks who live in rural Washington and can't travel 6 hours to Olympia. I think it's really important that those folks get heard and are part of the process. So I would just encourage everyone, if you want to be part of this process and you haven't had the chance before, because you couldn't get to Olympia, don't let that be a limiting factor.
Do you think that's if there's positive aspects, one positive aspect of the pandemic, that digital democracy and digital engagement has been shown to be something that can work?
I do. I think that's a really big silver lining that came out of this whole thing, is that we at the legislature we were forced to adjust to the modern world, and we've been talking a long time about how we make virtual testimony an option, and then the pandemic forced us into it, and we were able to do it, and we've shown we can do it. So I say we continue that effort and allow folks all over Washington to be part of the legislative process.